If I were to ask you to name 3 things that you dislike about motorcycling, I bet most of you could come up with at least 3. I know I can. And I've written my top 3 down here. And so think about your top 3 and let's just see how close we are. Ready? Here we go. I bet more than a few of you have this at least in the top 3 once, maybe 3 times. Before we get started, let me just say that I know that all dealerships aren't bad or corrupt or treat their customers badly, but I just think in general, the dealership model, especially in motorcycling, has changed significantly, at least in my lifetime, and I want to kind of get into that. In 1993, I moved to West Palm Beach. I had taken a new job, and I was doing okay, and I decided it was time for me to buy a new car. And the 94s had just come out, and I'd spotted a car I wanted. I knew exactly the model that I wanted, the color. I knew everything, and it wasn't a terribly expensive car. It was a very basic car. Almost every lot had one. So I went to my local car dealership to buy this car. And after a number of hours sitting talking to the salesperson who had frequently left to go talk to his boss about my offer and his offer and everything, we had come to an agreement. And the agreement was my trade-in plus this amount gets me and that car out the door. And I made that very clear, that I'm not here to buy by the month. This amount, that car gives me that car and out the door. And they said okay. And so they took me back to the area where the finance manager, I guess, sales manager is. And he had someone in his office, and so they had me sit right outside. And at the time I still heard pretty good. And so I was sort of listening to what was going on inside. And apparently there was a discrepancy in their deal. And much like me, this guy had said that you agreed to this amount, but he was talking about a monthly amount. And as I listened, I was just amazed at what I heard as an explanation as to why the price had changed. And it went a little bit like this. So the customer states that his monthly payment had gone up $25. Why did it go up $25 a month? That's just, he didn't understand. And so this finance person went on to explain that computers, you see, sometimes they make mistakes, and it happens all the time. The computers out here with the salespeople, now they sometimes they work good, sometimes they don't. And sometimes those sales computers don't align with this computer, which is the finance computer, which has the final say. And so you see, what had happened was the sales computers disagreed with the finance computer, but it was all a big mess-up. And we've got it figured out now. The finance computer has the actual price, which you can count on the finance computer because the finance computer is all-knowing. It's like the Wizard of Oz, apparently. But these other computers are just ignorant. They don't know how to add numbers. And so that was the line given to this customer. And they went through their deal. And eventually I was escorted into the office and wasn't sure what I was about to run into because I had bargained for a final price. And well, wouldn't you know it, the final price had changed by about 10%. And it just so happened that that 10% was because the sales computer had disagreed with the, you get the whole story. And I looked across at that guy and I said, it's funny, I sat outside your office and I heard the exact same line of BS. And I don't know about that. I'm not paying it. I mean, you agreed to that number because you were talking to my salesperson, and I don't care what that computer says. You know, that's the price. And so he got upset, accused me of, you know, calling him a liar, and papers were flying. You know, he put on a good show. It was a fantastic show of wasting my time. You know, and this went on for at least another hour. He was out of the office. He'd be gone for 15 or 20 minutes. You know. On and on it went. Eventually, I got the car at the price that they had agreed on, that I had agreed on. But it left such a bad taste in my mouth that, you know, I was beginning to see dealerships in a different light. Last year, my trip up to Georgia on my ZX14R, I was pulling the trailer. On the way home, I've got a flat tire. And the dealership offered to come and pick me up, but they had to bring a very long trailer because I had the motorcycle attached to the trailer. And so you know, they hit me with a price to come get me. And I said, come on, you know, I was going to pay them. And I got in the car, and there were two young men that had, you know, they were looking at this rig, and they were like, what is that? You know, I explained it to them on the ride there. And I said, listen, by the way, when we get there, I am the only one that can take this out of the trailer. I don't want you to try to do that. I said, if you've never backed up a motorcycle with short coupling to a trailer, then you have no hope of getting this out of here. So to take it out, wait for me. I'll get it out. I'll disconnect the trailer, and then you guys can go and put new tires on it. And that was the plan. So I went in to talk, and the owner was there, and you know, he was asking me about my trailer and everything. We started a conversation, and you know, I said, I'm just going to go ahead and put on a new front tire, new rear tire, and everything. And we were working that price up. And out of the corner of my eye, this young man comes up, and you know, I could just see something on his face. And long story short, he and his buddy had tried to back my motorcycle out of the trailer, and they got it as far as the ramp coming out of the trailer, and they dropped it. They dropped my ZX14R with the trailer attached. The bike had small damage, but the trailer was pretty scraped up because it had leveraged a roll, and so it got both sides of the trailer. And so, you know, I had to deal with that. And you know, they paid, you know, what I asked without having to go through their insurance. I would love to buy a new motorcycle, but I haven't in over 20 years for very much the same reason. The last time I bought a new motorcycle was when I bought that FZ1 right there in 2007. And it was a similar story, except this time I actually walked in with money in my pocket, greenback dollars, and I went to a local dealership that had a Yamaha 2007 FZ1. Black or blue, I really didn't care. There was two colors that year, and they had them both. And the salesperson, you know, started right there on the sales floor when I said, I want to buy this bike, but I just want to price out the door. He goes, well, that's a little complicated. I said, no, it's not. You know, and he started with the whole thing about, we've got to keep these lights on. Do you know what our power bill is? And do you know how much it costs to? And I just got so frustrated that I just immediately left, went home and got on the phone and just started calling every dealership and just saying, I'll bring you this amount of money for this. And I finally found a dealership about 150 miles away. It was a Yamaha dealership, but their big sales, I mean, was 4x4s and wave runners. And they just happened to have an FC1 that had been sitting there for probably 9 or 10 months that they had to offload. And the owner was like, sure. And I mean, the deal was done in minutes. Over the phone, we came to it. He faxed me the final price. I went there, laid the money out on the table, and we signed the papers, and I was done. And you know, that was a good experience, but it was good because they were trying to offload a motorcycle, but they were really selling 4x4s and wave runners and anything else but motorcycles. And so they didn't want to be stuck with a relatively low selling Yamaha motorcycle, because at the time the R1s and the R6s were selling good, but the FC1s weren't selling so good. And so, you know, here was someone offering cash to take that off their hands, and they took it. I think, we talked about in two of my previous videos how the barriers to motorcycling, I kind of think there are three. I think there's the initial fear of motorcycling, either from a parent to a child or just a person coming in that's never done it. And then there's, trends nowadays. It's probably less trendy to ride a motorcycle than it was in, previous generations. Or the trend of motorcycling is completely different. Where, like I've said, I think a lot of people buy motorcycles as an accessory to their lifestyle, and that's fine. That's fine, but you're going to pay for it because it's treated like a luxury item rather than a necessity item. And and I think that's the angle that a lot of dealerships take, is that if you're here to buy a motorcycle, well, then you can afford to step up and pay this little extra premium over here on the side, and you can pay this and you can pay that. But the truth is, for people getting into motorcycling, that's so far from the truth. And it seems like no dealership wants to, and no manufacturer really wants to, sort of go back to the basics and have a healthy line of motorcycles for new riders and younger riders. And I just see that as a big problem. I think the only answer to it is the used market, and I have embraced it. And it's not everybody's cup of tea. I think when I grew up riding, working on my bike was a necessity, because my very first bike was a Yamaha DT100. It was used, it was beat up, it was bad, but I didn't care. My dad reluctantly paid, I think we paid $175 or $200 for it. Dad paid it, and told me that anything it needed, you would have to earn your money and go and fix that. And I did. I did some work on that bike. I found out what was making it run poorly, and bought parts and started at an early age. I had been working on stuff, with my dad for years, and so that kind of benefited me. And it's something that it still does, because now I can still wrench on bikes and I can still do stuff. I can't, obviously if the engine needed overhauling, that's not something I would want to do or could do. I don't have the tools, the knowledge, or the space to do it. So, if my motorcycles need an engine overhaul, I'm going to sell it for scrap and start all over, I guess. But paying exorbitant fees to dealerships for the luxury of bringing home a motorcycle is something I'm never going to do again. And if the bike that I want can't be found used, well, then it can't be found. And that's just kind of how I look at motorcycling now. So I don't know what the future of dealerships and motorcycle buying is. I can only hope that the current model is replaced with something better, because I know there are riders out here that want to buy that don't. And I know there has to be a more cost-effective way of getting bikes from the manufacturer to the end user. I guess the only question that remains is, how useful are current dealerships in that pipeline? And I really don't know what the answer to that is. I can only know about me and where I am and how I'm going to go forward. And for sure, it does not include drinking from that straw anymore. Anyway, that's all I've got for this video. I really appreciate you guys watching, and for subscribing and for commenting, for those of you that have, and for those of you that haven't. If you like my content, please give me a consideration. Let me know what you think. If you like the videos, give me a thumbs up or a subscription. I would really appreciate it. See you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.